Hello everyone, my name is Rafi and in today's video I'm going to be covering about what is essay number 230 and what is the significance of audit documentation and what does essay 230 speak about. And to give another disclaimer, I am a CA intermediate student and I have taken classes from Edu91 and whatever content you can see on my screen is the material of my beloved Neeraj Arora sir. Okay, to start with, what is audit documentation? Audit documentation basically refers audit documentation. So if you ask me about what is audit documentation basically refers to a record. Record किस चीज का record? Record of AP, AE and C. So what is AP, AE and C? AP stands for auditing procedure, AE stands for auditing evidence and C stands for conclusions by whom, framed by the auditor. ठीक है? And it is also called as the working paper भी हम बुलाते हैं इसे. However, I say, and if you ask me why is it covered under a particular essay, ठीक है, वाई इज इट कवर्ड अंडर ऐसे 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 में आने के कारण इसीलिए इसलिए है क्योंकि आईसीए बेसिकली वांट्स ऑल द ऑडिटर्स टू प्रिपेयर द ऑडिट डॉक्यूमेंटेशन इन अ सिमिलर मैनर, एक ही एक फॉर्मेट में, एक ही एक टू आई वुड से टू ब्रिंग अ रीजनेबल यूनिफॉर्मिटी. what is reasonable? Reasonable refers to high but not absolute, right? So basically to bring reasonable uniformity in the documentation process, it is covered, it has been brought under this particular essay number 230, right? So if you ask me to read this again, ICA wants to develop uniformity in the form, in the content and in the nature of the audit documentation. Henceforth, to make it reasonably uniform, it has been covered under this particular essay. And secondly, moving on to the second point, which is nothing but what is the nature and the purpose of audit documentation. What is the main nature? The main nature of audit documentation is nothing to act as an evidence. किस चीज का evidence? Evidence for planning and the performance of an audit as per the essays and the legal and the regulatory requirements. If you can see this particular line, that is planning and performing of the audit as per the essays, as per the relevant essays and the compliance with the legal and regulatory requirements, you would have already linked this particular line with the essay number 220, which speaks about quality control of audit of financial statements, right? And third and secondly, it also acts as an auditor's evidence for the basis of his conclusion for achieving the overall objectives of an auditor. And the main, what is the main purpose of audit documentation, or what is the main purpose? Why are the things audit, why are the things documented in a particular thing? Okay, I'm sorry, to why are they documented in a working paper? So the main purpose is for planning and the performance of the audit procedure by providing assistance to the engagement team. It basically gives you an insight about how to plan and how to perform of your audit procedure. Okay. And secondly, it helps you in the supervision, direction and review. So in short, you can also say that it basically helps the member of the engagement team in performing DRS. What is DRS? DRS basically stands for direction, supervision and review of the auditing procedure, whatever is performed by whom, whatever is performed by the auditor. And for quality control review and inspection. So when you're basically performing the auditing procedure, and if you're noting down, if you're documenting all the auditing procedure in a particular working paper or in a particular document over here, it will basically act as a तुम्हारी quality of auditing, quality of the audit basically increases, right? So your quality control review is increased over here. Also the inspection, that is review of the main or same auditing procedure, can be reviewed again and hence would act as a purpose for inspection also. The fourth one is external inspection. अगर कोई बाहर वाला आ जाए तो बाहर वाला भी he can check out your audit documentation and he can inspect whatever procedures, whatever audit evidence, whatever you have obtained and what are the conclusions, whatever has been reached by the auditor can be explained in this particular document called as audit document. And fourthly, accountability of the work performed by the members of the engagement team. हालांकि as you know that in a particular engagement team, it comprises of several audit assistants also, that is article assistants, right? So the accountability of the work performed by each and every assistant and each and every member of the engagement teams, comprising of experts, comprising of the other senior auditors also, all of this can be checked via something called as audit documentation, as all the auditing procedures, whatever has been performed by them, will be recorded in this document. And for reference for the future audits also, say for example in the future you get to meet a similar case, okay, similar entity or similar auditing procedure has to be performed. In that particular case, you can refer your audit documentation and it will act as a guide for your future audits also. And coming to the third point, So what are the factors that affect the nature, form, and the content of audit documentation? So how is audit documentation basically affected? तो अंदर audit documentation का जो भी content है, what is the nature, form, and the content of audit documentation को कौन कौन से फैक्टर्स अफेक्ट करने वाले हैं, एंड कैसे हम मतलब जो फैक्टर कैसे हम ऑडिट डॉक्यूमेंटेशन को मतलब अफेक्ट, कैसे हम ऑडिट डॉक्यूमेंटेशंस को मतलब फैक्टर्स रिकॉर्ड करते हैं, ठीक है? तो टू स्टार्ट विद, इट बेसिकली डिपेंड्स अपॉन द साइज एंड कॉम्प्लेक्सिटी ऑफ द एंटिटी. सो द साइज, अगर साइज एंड कॉम्प्लेक्सिटी ऑफ द एंटिटी अगर बड़ी है, अगर कंपनी की साइज बड़ी है, और अगर कॉम्प्लेक्सिटी इन्वॉल्वड इन पर्टिकुलर एंटिटी इज आल्सो वेरी हायर, देन द फॉर्म एंड द कंटेंट ऑफ द ऑडिट डॉक्यूमेंटेशन इज आल्सो गोना बी वेरी हाई, एंड वेरी huge amount of data, huge amount of auditing procedures, huge amount of records are going to be documented over here. And third one is the assess ROMM. अगर तुम्हारा what is ROMM? ROMM basically refers to risk of material misstatement. So अगर तुम्हारा ROMM ज़्यादा है, तो तब तुम ज़्यादा से ज़्यादा ये कर पाओगे, ऑडिट डॉक्यूमेंटेशन में ज़्यादा से ज़्यादा कंटेंट लिख पाओगे. एंड थर्डली यू हैव द सिग्निफिकेंस ऑफ ऑडिट एविडेंस. अगर तुम्हारा ऑडिट एविडेंस बहुत ही मतलब ज़्यादा सिग्निफिकेंट है, देन यू कैन फिल अप द पेजेस ऑन योर ऑडिट डॉक्यूमेंटेशन. And the fourth one is basis of conclusions reached by whom? Basis of conclusions reached by the particular auditor, which can be, see, just by recording all of these basis of conclusions as audit documentation, it will basically help the external and third party to know कि किस वजह से he basically derived at this particular conclusion. What is the basis of his conclusion? किस चीज के basis पर वो उस conclusion को आ पाया. And the fifth one is the nature and the extent of the exceptions, and the audit methodology and the tools used. What is audit methodology and the tools used? Audit methodology and tool used meaning what are the accounting softwares, what are the auditing tools, whatever has been used by this particular auditor. Everything can be documented in this. Everything can be documented. Okay, and now when it comes to nature of exception basically refers to the varying degree in particular items of financial statements. I'll make it more clear just by giving you another example. That is, in your books of accounts, the debtor balance is 5 lakh rupees, and the debtors and in the debtors books of accounts, the balance is 25 lakh rupees. Right. So this varying nature of degree, this degree of varying nature between your balance and the debtor's balance is called as basically called as a exception. And fourthly, what are the examples of audit documentation? As you know, we have already studied audit program. So audit program is also an example of audit documentation: analysis, issue memoranda, summary of the significant matters recorded by whom, summary of the significant matters as recorded by the auditor, and I can also call this summary of significant matters as completion memorandum B. I can also call it as a completion memorandum also. And you also have letter of acceptance and the representation made, and the checklist, whatever the checklist you have ticked. Okay, all this forms part of your audit documentation, and these are the examples of audit documentation. And fourth one is what is the form, content, and the extent of audit documentation. This basically says कि audit documentation कैसे होना चाहिए, and basically tells you कि audit document कैसे होना चाहिए. It must be sufficient for an experienced auditor to understand. तो experienced auditor जो है तुम्हारा, experienced auditor को मतलब समझ में आना चाहिए कि what are the results of the auditing procedure, what are the auditing evidence obtained, including any significant matters discovered during the auditing procedure, and the conclusions reached by the auditor, plus the professional judgments applied in reaching those conclusions, and how he has addressed those particular significant matters also. ये सारे के सारी चीज जो है इस particular audit documentation में record होनी चाहिए, and this is how the form, content, and extent must be there. And if you ask me who is an experienced auditor, okay, experienced auditor basically refers to that particular this auditor basically refers to an auditor who who is an auditor. Auditor is a member of the Institute of Chartered Accountants of India. So this particular person may be external or internal to the firm, external to internal to the entity, where he has practical knowledge of, and who can reasonably understand about the audit operations over here, how is auditing done, and how is auditing done, and what are the financial reporting standards over here, what are the audit reporting standards and everything. Okay, he has a he has plenty of knowledge about all of these particular operations. And audit evidence obtained, including any significant matters discovered during the audit, and the conclusions reached by the auditor, plus the professional judgments applied in reaching those conclusions. Each and everything has to form part and parcel of your audit documentation. It must also include the nature, extent, and timing of the audit procedure. What is nature, extent, and timing? That refers to an NET of your audit procedure. NET of audit procedure meaning उसके अंदर क्या होना चाहिए? इसके अंदर it must basically record assertions used, that is identifying the characteristics of the elements tested, who performed the audit work, and the date when was the audit completed, and who reviewed the audit work, and what is the date of such review, and what is the extent of such review. However, the audit document shall not include the following. This audit documentation may some matters shall also not be included. These matters refers to superseding drafts of the working papers and the financial statement, that is the rough documents, whatever the auditor has basically drawn a summary of uh, superseding documents and drafts. And you also have the previous copies of the corrected typo errors and the other errors, and copies of the other documents also. And you also have the notes made by whom? The notes made by the auditor, which are of preliminary nature. And the notes which are made by the auditor, which are of preliminary or incomplete thinking. That is, say for example, an auditor wants to draw a rough calculation or rough analysis is done by an auditor over here, and he uses a paper or a medium just to record the same thing. Then whatever things is recording it on a particular paper over here, the same thing shall also not form part of the audit documentation. Now, if you ask me, who owns the audit documentation, right? So audit documentation is basically as per SQC1, that is standard for quality control, and the SA number 230 says that audit documentation is the complete property of the auditor, entire property of the auditor. And however, the auditor has to establish reasonable policies and the procedures to safeguard that particular to safeguard his audit documentation, and he must also maintain its confidentiality, and he must also keep it under a safe custody. And thirdly, the auditor, he may at his own discretion, if the auditor wants, then he can make the audit evidence basically available, audit documentation available to whom? He can make it available to the client. But he must remember that while making it available to whom, but that while making it available to the client, it must not undermine the validity of his particular audit work, whatever has been performed by him. And higher the amount of professional judgment an auditor basically uses in a particular audit procedure, the higher amount of content will be recorded in audit documentation, which is very obvious. And now, as you can see, in company audits, can the auditor obtain the working papers of the branch auditor? No. The answer is clear no. He can't obtain the working papers of the branch auditor. If you ask me why, that is SQC1 clearly says that, and the auditor cannot ask for the copy of the working papers, and the branch auditor shouldn't be compelled to provide the copies of the working papers. But however, this particular auditor of the company, that is, who is also called as the principal auditor or the main auditor, as I have shown over here, the main auditor can seek clarifications and can also visit the branch for the clarity purpose and for performing of an audit procedure, but he cannot compel the branch auditor to give him his working papers and everything. And directly I'm going to take you to something called as SA number 240. So what is SA number 240? SA number 240 basically says that the responsibility for the prevention detection of the errors in an organization is everything. Who's responsible for preventing and detection of the errors? The answer is very clear. That it is a responsibility of the management over here. How will management do it? Management will do it by establishment of internal controls and procedures over here. If you can remember, the auditor cannot give you reasonable assurance. The auditor cannot give you absolute assurance. Why cannot the auditor give you absolute assurance? Absolute assurance cannot be given with the auditor due to what? Due to something called as ILA. I'll repeat once again. What is it? It's nothing but an ILA. ILA, that is inherent limitations of auditing. Due to what? Due to the inherent limitations of auditor, an auditor cannot basically give absolute assurance over here. Now, if there is subsequent discovery of the risk of material misstatement, after the subsequent discovery of the material misstatements in the financial statements over here, does it lead to the failure of the auditor to conduct the auditing as per the policies and the procedure, as per the standards and as per the rules and regulations? If you ask me, the answer would be a clear no. It does not indicate the failure of an auditor. Why so? Why isn't it done? Why isn't it indicated as the failure of an auditor? Because the work done by the auditor is not done negligently. And in the second case, if you ask me, if there is a deep late fraud, during the normal examination, which does not come to the notice of an auditor over here, and however he has issued an audit report, okay, and he has performed his auditing procedures over here, then will that also lead to a failure of an auditor to conduct the audit? The answer would be no, still no. Why? Provided that if he has not performed the work, provided that he has not performed the audit work negligently. And what does negligently refer to? Negligently, as per the context of this essay number 240, it refers to compliance with the relevant essays and the compliance with the legal and the regulatory requirements by whom? Requirements by the auditor. And when can we say that these two elements that I discussed over here, that is compliance with the relevant essays and the compliance with the legal and regulatory requirements of the auditor, when can you say that these things will be achieved? These things can be determined by the auditing procedures performed, AP performed, sufficient and appropriate AE obtained, and the suitability of the auditor's report, which is based on the evidence as obtained by whom? As obtained by the auditor. So, and now if you ask me, key, how can all of these three items, whatever listed over here, how can these three items be achieved? How can this thing be checked, and how can this thing be reviewed? All of this can be reviewed by only one thing, that is called as your audit documentation. So through audit documentation, you can basically it basically gives you a complete details of the auditing procedures performed, AP, AE, and C as obtained by the auditor. And as you can see this meme over here, which says about the auditor cannot rely on the less than persuasive evidence over here, because because the inherent limitations of auditing do not allow an auditor to basically rely on the less than persuasive auditor, and to satisfy the same thing, and to perform his auditing procedure, he cannot do so. And if you ask me what is auditing files, auditing file basically refers to one or more folders of storage media. Storage media in sense, it can either be in a form of physical form or electronic form. जैसे कि पेन ड्राइव भी हो सकता है, नहीं तो एक नॉर्मल फिजिकल डॉक्यूमेंट भी हो सकता है, जिसमें तुम रिकॉर्ड करने वाले हो तुम्हारे सारे के सारे ऑडिट डॉक्यूमेंटेशन ऑफ ए स्पेसिफिक एंगेजमेंट। मतलब अगर एक एक एंगेजमेंट तुम्हें मिला है, तो उस एक एक एंगेजमेंट को तुम उठाकर उस ऑडिट को डॉक्यूमेंट करोगे, डॉक्यूमेंटेशन करने के बाद उस फाइल में तुम स्टोर कर लोगे, तो इसे बोलते हैं ऑडिट फाइल्स। एंड द नेक्स्ट क्वेश्चन आता है कि हमें कब ऑडिट डॉक्यूमेंटेशन करनी चाहिए, एंड हमें कब असेंबली ऑफ द फाइनल ऑडिट फाइल्स भी करनी चाहिए। सो इफ यू आस्क मी नाउ व्हाट इज असेंबली ऑफ फाइनल ऑडिट फाइल्स, आई फाइनल ऑडिट फाइल इज yeah, wait, I'll come on to this aspect of final audit files a bit later. Okay, so currently audit documentation, this audit document has to be prepared on a timely basis. That is, जैसे auditor तुम्हारा record audit procedure कर रहा है, तो उसी time तुम्हें ऑडिटिंग जो भी तुम्हारा ऑडिट प्रोसीजर है, उस ऑडिट प्रोसीजर को तुम्हें डॉक्यूमेंट करते चले जाना चाहिए। क्यों करे क्यों तुम्हें करे वाई शुड यू डू इट दैट वे? यू शुड डू इट दैट वे इन ऑर्डर टू डू इट, इन ऑर्डर टू एनहांस द क्वालिटी ऑफ द ऑडिट। तुम्हारी जो ऑडिट की क्वालिटी बनेगी, ऑडिट की क्वालिटी और एनहांस रहेगी, एंड टू रिव्यू एंड effectively evaluate the audit evidence obtained and the conclusions reached by the auditor before the final audit report is prepared. Now say for example an auditing procedure is being performed over here, and you're documenting the same thing side by side. That is, जैसे तुम ऑडिट प्रोसीजर अप्लाई कर रहे हो, वैसे के वैसे साथ साथ तुम उसको ऑडिट डॉक्यूमेंट भी कर रहे हो। इससे तुम्हारी the risk of overlooking or the risk of ignoring any facts in the procedures performed or the audit evidence obtained, nothing will be ignored over here, right? And now taking another instance where you're gonna document everything, okay, after the completion of your auditing procedure, then you might tamper the quality of an auditing procedure over here. Now whatever things you have documented, as you can see over here, whatever things you have documented over here, everything is stored in, everything is called as audit documentation. All of this audit documentation should be assembled into what? It should be assembled into something called as auditing file. The final audit file shall be assembled by the auditor on a timely basis, and a timely basis, that is after the date of the auditor's report. And as I said over here, what is final audit file? Final audit file basically refers to the list of all the things, whatever has been documented over here. The same thing has to be arranged into something, has to be arranged into your audit file. Okay, so when it comes to the final audit of final report, final document, final auditing documentation has to be has to be assembled into what? Into something called as auditing files over here. The final audit file shall be assembled with the auditor on a timely basis, and and if you ask me what is this timely basis, timely basis has been clearly defined by SQC 1. Okay, so what does it say? It basically says that a date not exceeding 60 days from the date of the auditor's report. So just remember one thing: this this assembly process, okay, this assembly process of the final audit file should basically take place after the auditor's report. That is, after the audit report has been prepared. After this only you're going to do what? After this only you're going to assemble the same thing into your final audit file. And one more thing you must remember, that is, in this particular assembly process of your final audit file is administrative in nature, and it does not involve any sort of auditing procedures and additional auditing procedures, or drawing of conclusion. Nothing is involved over here. However, the changes to the audit document can be made in the aspect of administrative nature at the stage of final assembly process. So if at all you want to make any sort of changes to the audit documentation, the same changes can be made uh, only in the nature of administrative nature. Ke changes you can make it to the home, you can make it to your audit documentation. So what are the examples of such changes? The examples of such changes are as follows. We have as what you can see on the screen, that is discarding of the superseded documentation, sorting and collating of cross-referencing working papers, signing off on the completed checklist relating to the assembly process. Signing off on the completed checklist relating to the assembly process basically refers to what it means, that you're ticking on all of your all of the work. That is the best example what I can give over here is an article assistant in a particular audit firm ticking off on all the tasks whatever was given to him regarding the assembly process of an audit documentation. Okay, the signing off of all the things that shall these are the changes which can be made to the audit file over here. Okay, and the document of the audit evidence as obtained before the date of audit report, which has been obtained, discussed and agreed upon by the auditor and with the engagement team members over here. No deletion and discarding shall be made to the final audit files by the auditor until the retention period. Until what? Until the retention period. No deletion, discarding, nothing can be made. Can be made by whom? Shall be made by the auditor until what? Until the retention period. Now, if you ask me what is retention period, retention period has been defined over here, as you can see. Just give me a minute. I'm so sorry for this. Yeah, as you can see over here, what is retention period? Retention period may the auditor shall basically should not discard or should not delete anything for no less than 7 years or more from the date of the auditor's report or the group auditor's report. Okay. And one more thing, he can do anything. He can delete or discard after the 7 years. But the minimum time limit is how much? Minimum time limit is at least 7 years. Okay, this thing is a retention period. So this retention period may the auditor therefore the auditor must basically establish certain policies and procedures to basically retain all of these audit, to retain what, not to retain the audit documentation over here, to retain the engagement documentation. And now, what is completion memorandum and why is it advisable to maintain? An auditor over here, it is basically advised by this particular standard for an auditor to maintain a summary of all the auditing procedures whatever is going to be performed by this particular auditor over here. Okay, summary of the same thing, summary in sense which will form part and parcel of the audit documentation. Okay, summary of what? Summary किस चीज का summary regarding the significant matters and how the auditor basically addresses those particular matters over here. And now if you ask me what is the significance, what is the help, what help do we get by by making a summary of all of these? The basic help is, in the case of large audits, especially in the case of huge audits over here, it helps you to review and to inspect the audit documentation. And also, if you can remember SA number 220, that is CASA, OEA CASA, over there it helps the auditor to check, to review if he has basically achieved the overall objectives of the auditor and the overall and the objectives of the relevant essays whatever he has complied with. And now, coming on to the next topic, that is what matters have to be what matters have to be documented over here after the final audit report, and can an auditor do so? Primarily under this particular standard, auditor cannot do so, but with the help of but by taking into reference SA number 560, which is nothing but subsequent actions by an auditor. Over here the auditor can do what? The auditor can, the additional auditing procedure whatever has been performed by the auditor, audit evidence and the conclusions reached, plus the effect of them on the auditor's report can be recorded. Okay, can all be documented over here, and the circumstances encountered by the auditor over here, and by whom and by when were they completed and when were they reviewed. And now moving on to the next topic, that is significant. How are the significant matters documented and what are its advantages? Okay, so the significant matters basically require an objective evaluation. If you ask me what is objective evaluation basically refers to independent evaluation of the facts and circumstances Nature and form and the content of the audit documentation depends on the professional judgment of the auditor, and the auditor shall record his professional judgment. So the nature, form, and the content of the audit documentation, as you know, that is basis of conclusion. The amount of conclusions you're going to make over here, it basically involves something called as professional judgment. So there is nothing best other than professional judgment for deriving of the accuracy of the assertions and all, right? So it is important to record the professional judgment over here. Okay, why should the professional judgment be recorded? Because it basically it increases the quality of the professional, it increases the quality of the professional judgment of an auditor. It also helps in subsequent audits, and the review of the audit documentation can be done, and also helps in explaining the conclusions reached by him, explains the conclusions reached by the auditor over here. And coming on to the next topic, which speaks about what are the significant matters we speak about above. So either हम जो भी significant matters discuss किए हैं, so this thing is telling you what are the significant matters. The significant matters is very simple. It basically refer to what is audit evidence obtained which can modify the auditor's opinion. What is significant? Significant basically refers to huge, okay, huge matters which can, influence, or which can basically modify the auditor's opinion. And secondly, you also have the auditing evidence which could lead to inclusion of your inclusion of your EOM matters in your auditing report. Auditing procedures that result in financial misstatements, and the auditing procedures what lead to the revision of assessment of your ROMM, and situations that cause a huge difficulty for the auditor to apply his auditing procedures, and the other matters as listed in the inherent limitations of auditing. That is ILA. It is to brief you about it. It is nothing but a fraud, related party relationships, non-compliance of other laws, and also the future events. Thank you.